necessary to actually be obedient to what it is you have to do. So, we do humility, active charity. But humility is one of the better ones.
I'm going to set this down here.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. On Litany of Humility, you just have a invocation of Christ at the beginning, and then you respond, hear me. And then from all of the things we're being delivered from, you say, deliver me, O Jesus. And then we'll get down to things that we're asking for. So, for instance, that others may be loved more than I. Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it, is the response. And we'll go down like that. Litanies are, generally speaking, an old-fashioned form of prayer today, but this is one of the ones that is still popular. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. O Jesus, meek and humble of heart,
Make my heart like unto thine.
from the desire of being esteemed, deliver me, Jesus. From the desire of being loved, deliver me, Jesus. From the desire of being extolled, deliver me, Jesus. From the desire of being honored, deliver me, Jesus. From the desire of being praised, deliver me, Jesus. From the desire of being preferred to others, deliver me, Jesus. From the desire of being consulted, deliver me, Jesus. From the desire of being approved, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being humiliated, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being despised, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of suffering rebukes, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being calumniated, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being forgotten, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being ridiculed, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being wronged, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of being suspected, deliver me, Jesus. That others may be loved more than I, Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it.
Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it.
That others may be esteemed more than I, Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it. That in the opinion of the world others may increase and I may decrease, Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it. That others may be chosen and I set aside, Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it. That others may be praised and I go unnoticed, Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it. That others may be preferred to me in everything, Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it. That others may become holier than I, provided that I may become as holy as I should. Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it. On charity. Charity is patient, is kind. Charity does not envy, is not pretentious, is not puffed up, is not ambitious, is not self-seeking, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice over wickedness, but rejoices with truth, bears with all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. To have charity is to love God above all things for himself and be ready to renounce all created things rather than offend him by serious sin. O my God, I love thee with my whole heart and soul and above all things, because thou art infinitely good and perfect and most worthy of all my love. And for thy sake I love my neighbor as myself. Mercifully grant, O my God, that having loved thee on earth, I may love and enjoy thee forever in heaven. Amen. All right. How did we, those of us who, well, I mean, I guess I sent it to everybody, but those of us who had the book or didn't have any problems reading, did we get through the sections on prayer? Mm-hmm. All right. How did we find it? Did we have any sort of immediate questions on our reading? No. Did we learn anything? What did we learn?
I think it's nice to put more, each of the types of prayer. I feel like I have heard of, and words not as specific. Yeah. I don't know.
What was you saying?
Makes me agree.
St. Anthony the Great.
Not in yet. Okay. Go ahead. What did we learn?
A lot, but the one thing that was kind of, I guess, just kind of an aha moment, just coming from the Protestant side, prayer is very different, spontaneous. It was different coming to the Catholic side because it almost felt rote. What was interesting is when I was learning about how Jesus would have learned to pray, and so in that. He would have learned those prayers. He would have learned the Psalms. He would have done all that. So it was just interesting, coming from the Protestant side to the Catholic side.
Yeah, I had that as well. Although it was weird. It was weird. Some guys would be against what would be equivalent to verbal prayer, but then we had all these songs, and it would end up being the Psalms. So it's a little. It was always a little odd to me. I'm like, what do you mean formulaic when we just did, God who art my God, the last, 5 times we went to chapel. But yeah, for me it became, I guess I never thought about it. Then I realized that the Psalter was basically rote Jewish prayers. And once you realize that, it's over. You can't really have too much to say against rote prayers. On top of the Lord's Prayer. I have heard somebody try to defend the idea that the Lord's Prayer is a template rather than a formula, but the Psalms seem to be a clobber because Christ just recites them from time to time.
Formula, same thing.
Well, formula, right?
But
template
formula don't they mean the same thing though?
Did I say template formula?
You said template. Yeah. They said template. And you said it's a formula.
Oh, I think I said or formula. I probably slurred it.
But there's similar, like a template and a formula.
Well, right.
Or no?
It's irrelevant to the point. I'm saying that I've heard somebody try to defend the idea that it's a template or formula rather than a rote prayer to be recited. You see what I'm saying? Like a model. But even if you wanted to uphold that, the Psalms are pretty much a clobber. Because Christ evokes them from time to time in full, which means you're supposed to call them to mind. And we know perfectly well how the first century Jews practiced, so that doesn't make any sense.
I had a friend who had an evangelical minister, and he said, see, the difference in prayer is that we pray, you people say prayers. In other words, we pray from the heart. So he was coming from that perspective, not realizing that that's one form, and that saying prayers can also come from the heart once you freely determine that. We have free will to determine that. We say those prayers. I think that's important.
I think it depends on the Protestant, denomination as well, because I grew up Protestant, and I think that the word that we put to saying Psalms, I did Bible school, I had to memorize Psalms, so I think it was more of that they looked at as a studying or meditation, and the word prayer wasn't put to that, but I still memorized a lot of rote sayings. I just wasn't taught to look at it as a word of prayer, because that was more of a talking, what we're counting as vocal, or I guess vocal, just talking with God, and that was looked as the prayer, and then you still learned the Psalms. So I think sometimes I feel we draw a line of maybe we need to be a little more understanding of how things might be taught differently in terms of verbiage.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and the classic mainline traditions all had just straight up same thing we do. So what actually happened, at least as near as I can tell, and I think it has to do with evangelization against us, probably also classical mainline Protestantism, is that in the middle of the century in evangelical practice, there came to be this idea that you needed to get people off dead faith, which tended to be characterized as, you go to church and you say this thing and you do the routine and you don't have any conviction. And part of the polemic of that is getting off of rote, which is, the truth of that is that, look, all these prayers, and I think Brent says something like this, all these prayers you have to say with devotion. You have to say them with meaning. Which is not to say that, I'll get you. Which is not to say that you can't go to, like if you have a divine office, choral office, and you need to say it, and for whatever reason it's not in your heart, that's still a meritorious work. But in as far as it's a personal prayer of actual spiritual value to you in particular, as a prayer, you have to say it with engagement.
Well, that's what Father was talking about a few months ago with the it was a few months ago in a homily, but it was with for which saint it was, but the one with the vision of the angels writing down the prayers as they're singing them. One angel was writing the prayer in coal, another in golden letters, but essentially it was correlating to they're all singing the same song, but to the degree they were pleasing to God was singing in their heart.
Yeah, it has to be on your heart. Which is why I don't, when I said last week, and I didn't mean to be insulting in any way to Latin, but I said I won't memorize Latin with you unless you tell me you can understand it. Why? Because if all you have are those sounds, there's no way it's on your heart at all. Go ahead.
And this is just something I'm kind of curious about, but do prayers for, because we baptize an infant, or we have children learn prayers and say them, or we may say or the priest may bless us and we may not understand it. Is there still a benefit or a blessing that's received even if the person doesn't understand the blessing that they're getting, they don't understand the words, or like when you have a child start to learn the Lord's Prayer, is it still like good for them to be saying it even though they're not understanding it yet?
So we need to make a distinction. So when I said that, so these prayers need to be spiritually efficacious. You need to know what these things are for them to be spiritually efficacious. You need to. So for instance, things. So first of all, things where they have an effect by virtue of what they are. So just take for instance, if the priest says the words of consecration, you certainly don't need to know what those words mean. And should the priest have an imperfect understanding exactly of what he's saying, by virtue of doing the act, it's still accomplished. Blessings, sacramental actions, anything by virtue of the words being said that have an effect, that's fine. They still have the effect. When I say if you want a spiritual effect, I mean that. Say you're doing a petition, for instance, you're asking God for something. Well, you have to know what you're asking for. At the very least, you could be given some Latin words and somebody could tell you what they mean, and you could say them asking for what you think they mean. And then even if they mean other things, you're not going to get the effect of what they actually mean. Because you have to be, you get what you ask for from God, not what not what you happen to slur sounds out of your mouth.
But does it start like a child who's learning the Hail Mary Lord's Prayer for the first time and not yet understanding it? Is there still some work that's being done? Like, is it still good for you to
Oh, yeah, of course, there's still, in that sense, like you, that has the positive effect of spiritual preparation. Look, at a certain level, because I'm dealing with adults, I don't necessarily consider the idea that we're learning what we're saying, certainly in English. But there's certainly at the level of preparation and literacy, there's a day you have to sit down and learn what the Bible is saying. And, and does it have an effect on me before I quite know what it's saying? Of course it does. I think that what you're always, anybody want to, thanks. I think tacitly what you're always asking when you're preparing is you're asking God to let you come to understand it and learn it. and you'd be given the relevant graces. What were y'all's saints?
What?
I've got
You're saying,
Oh, Saint Maria Goretti.
And Padre Pio?
I've got Pio. Let me see about Goretti. Don't have Goretti yet. Is she the woman who? Is that the? She died, I think.
she was a physician who died in right after
Maria
childbirth.
Gorgetti, no,
I've-
no.
No.
She's the one
She was
she's
the
young
11-year-old
Oh, I'm sorry,
virgin
yeah.
martyr.
Oh yeah, I did get
Yeah.
one for her, and that's coming. Good.
I have bagels and donuts.
And
Uh-oh.
what was your saint?
My saint, I had both John and Benedict. Where should I set this up for anybody that wants? See, we already have some bagels.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody want donuts for the less healthy option? Thank you very much.
It's amazing. It's one day that I didn't bring any.
All right.
Sorry. Is there anybody that wants? Grab one for myself.
Since we have everybody now, it's back to our exercise. Let me remember the tone. I'm still going to try listing method without referral. Although I'll probably this week I'll send you a copy of this, and you can look at it when you're not here. Okay. So, also I was going to talk a little bit more about putting these on the heart, about getting to memories. First of all, again, it's this question of, hey, what was your saint again?
Judas.
Judas. What was your saint again?
Jude Thaddeus.
Jude. Oh no, I get you were the one I don't think I could get.
Actually, I found something online, so I ordered it.
Okay, very
There
good.
was a novena.
Oh, a novena. Okay, but not a whole life of the saint, or
No, but there's another book that I went ahead and ordered too. I don't know what's in it yet. But
okay. Well, we'll see. All right. So, some additional things about memorizing these. So, part of memorizing is sort of recitation. In fact, that's the classical straight way of memorizing it. But other things that help are sort of you go over the thing in your free time or whatever, and you start going over it, and you go, typically, first of all, usually, classically, these things to be read aloud. Frankly, everything ought to be read aloud. If you want to, all the fathers presuppose basically you read aloud. In fact, there's a weird moment in the Rule of Saint Benedict where it says something along the lines of, and then if they desire, let them read alone in bed, except that they disturb the others. And you go, what does that mean? What do you mean? Why would you disturb it? Why would this? What would be? Would you don't turn the pages too loudly? And the reason they say that is because it's supposed that you're reading out loud. So basically, Benedict is saying either read very quietly out loud, or read the silence of your head. But he supposes that most people have to read out loud. You'll find that you can get about 150 words a minute out loud. It's slower than if you speed read. Or at least if you're an advanced reader. Advanced silent reading probably for most people gets up to about 200 to 300 words a minute. So it's slower, but for most spiritual purposes, 150 words a minute is about right. Because why? Because unless you're doing something like, unless you're doing information study, so, you just need to get the history of, I need to, like if I need to just text dump the history of the church for 2,000 years or something, a bunch of big books. If you're doing spiritual study, it's about 150 words a minute is the digestion rate. Everything else, you are just going over themes. You are probably not going to retain it in a reflective manner. And so I strongly recommend out loud reading for anything, certainly for the Bible, certainly for any life of the saint, anything like that. Read it out loud to yourself. So that's step one. And what does that do? I mean, at first, it forces you to slow down. It forces you to hear it. But then you got to go over it, and you got to say. So you'll just do it, and don't do it with me. I'm just going to get it. So, and I'll go over this again when we talk about Lectio, because this is the basically I'm giving you the beginning mechanics of doing Lectio Divina. This kind of spiritual reading. So you'll go, you start saying, "Blessed indeed is the." You'll say it out loud to yourself. So, "Blessed indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night." Now, it's a terrible reading out loud, but it's just for demonstration. So then you start to go, you sit here with it, and you go, "Blessed indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, who follows not the counsel." You start to ruminate on in fact the basic words having to do with meditation in the ancient language has to do with also with rumination. You go over it, and it's as if you spit it back up. So you've just said it, and then you go, "Who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, who follows not in the counsel of the wicked," and you start to chew on the words, and then you sit there and you go. You think and you go, "Blessed indeed is a man." So you could start to say it. He's blessed. So a man is blessed. He's got a blessing. He's been given some kind of gift. He's given some kind of divine favor. Why? Because he didn't follow in the counsel of the wicked. The counsel of what do you mean? That is to say, the kind of advice the wicked give, the kind of course, the kind of life that wicked people. Bad people, ungodly people, would tell you to live, and you start to. So you start to get used to. We give ourselves an explanation. We start to think it out, and you deepen that this process of memorization. So you can even get a commentary. You get a commentary on the Psalms. So this is one path. So you go through it. You know it all, and then you start to chew it up and to try to get the exact words, and you start breaking those down into their meaning, especially if you read it and you're not clear to yourself. The Psalms usually don't have anything that's too unclear, but every once in a while something will come up. Like, for instance, "Not so the wicked, not so, for they, like winnowed chaff, shall be driven away by the wind," is a stanza in here. What, does anybody...
Is that chaff, C-H-A-F-F?
I say chaff.
Chaff.
Yeah.
Chaff.
Chaff or chaff?
Chaff.
I say chaff.
Chaff. Wheat. The wheat and the chaff, or chaff. I've said chaff for many years, but in any case, if you don't know, like, who besides wheat and the chaff or chaff, do you know what winnowed chaff is?
And what is winnowed?
Beat, separated out.
Thrashed.
In the process of making wheat, they have to separate the
Yeah.
seeds from and that becomes like the kind of garbage or refuse, the chaff.
Yeah. So so that you either looked that up, or you asked somebody, or you thought about it more. So, because that's a little obscure, It's an agricultural metaphor, and most of us aren't farmers in any way or shape or form nowadays. Of course, at the time, it would have been supposed that most of the metaphors of the Bible are easy metaphors.
So that's saying you have to separate the wheat from the...
Well, it's not not so the wicked, not so, for they, like winnowed chaff, shall be driven away by the wind. When you thresh grain, the grains are heavy, and the husk, the stuff, just the floofy stuff you don't eat, just goes off into the wind. That's one method. Toss it up, and the useless part flies away, goes off, and so you might have had. So again, how does this help? How does this help the memory? You're sitting there and you're saying these words out, and you get to this dead line, or this might be dead line. For they, like winnowed chaff, shall be driven away by the wind. And you might say that, and you go, winnowed chaff, I don't know what that is. But you just try to get it in the head anyway, and it won't stick. Well, how do you get, you look it up. You look it up, you see what it means, and then you try to think about what it is. You try to process it. And you should do that with anything in the Bible. Or anything in spiritual reading, really, unless you don't have time. But I mean, at this pace of reading I'm talking about, you should have time. So, and of course, try to go through a whole thing and try to get a unit intellectually, and then try to start to digest it. And especially if you have something you don't know, or you don't think you know well, figure out what it is, and then reapply that and rethink about it. And, this is part of getting it in the heart. All right. One time. Okay. All right. Let's see. How did I want to do this week? Because we figured out that singing it, you got it better. Okay. So I'm going to try to do... Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sing the whole first, I guess, stanza. I don't know that that's right for how these are blocked out, but that's what I'm using. I'm going to sing the whole first unit or stanza, and then I'll have you repeat it with me while I sing it. Then I'll go so that you have to chant these in pairs or triplets. I'll go a pair, and then I'll let you do it. And then I'll go a pair, and then I'll let you do it. And then I'll go a pair, and then I'll let you do it. Then we'll try to do the whole thing again together, and then we'll see if you can get it. So let's see. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night. All right, now with me. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night. All right. Now I'll do 2 lines, then you'll do 2 lines, but I won't be there. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked.
Let's try that one again. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked,
Nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners,
nor stands in the path of sinners, nor abides in the counsel of scorners.
Okay. But whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night.
But whose delight is in the law of the Lord, who ponders his law day and night.
The only problem with the singing is the tendency to want to drop out. So somebody will lose the tone, especially if they're not used to it, and then it's hard on the group. And that happens with chant all the time.
Well, I drop out if it seems like we're getting it wrong. Start saying, I'm like, I think I had it right, but other people were saying something different, so I'm just going to stop.
So that's a difficulty.
I'll pick it up.
Father talks about that when we do chant. Father talks about that in terms of love of your neighbor. So, if as a choral matter, my procedure is if I know that I've lost the chant, just in any case, also some things you can do since you're trying to hear it from me. If you do have, these are just little neuralgic things. It's not really about the memory. So when you're trying to repeat it back, if you've got something, because we got stuck on nor stands in the path, nor is what we got stuck on last week. It's perfectly acceptable trying to do it by ear to like sit down on a piece of paper and go, nor stands, nor abides. Because that's a thing for whatever reason won't come out of my mouth. That's still perfectly within the spirit of the thing.
What version is this?
Abbey Psalms and Canticles, and I said last week that why did I pick this version? I picked this version because when we reform the Liturgy of the Hours here in about a year or two, these are the Psalms that will be used. And when we reform the Missal again, which will probably be within 10 years, 5-10 years, these will be the Psalms. These can actually be used now, but I don't know, and I'm pretty sure Mary doesn't, and I don't know any choir director in the country outside of religious houses that use these now. It's actually it's the Grail Psalter, which is very famous, but revised a little bit, and the USCCB purchased the rights to it, which they like. they like to use translations they own.
Where did you get that?
You have to. It's actually difficult now.
I know. I looked and I'm like, it's out of print.
Yeah, you got it. It's not the USCCB website doesn't have any. It doesn't exist anymore. The shop doesn't. Can't get it on Amazon.
No.
I had to get it. I went on Google. It was like the second or third website down. You can get it. And I'll what I'm going to do this week is I'm going to send it to you in the email. I'll send you it.
I'm not sure I'm getting your emails. I sent you my email.
I get email.
Yeah, could somebody pass around a sheet and we get all the emails and names on it? I was told we had everything and we don't have everything. And the reason I didn't send it to you is because I didn't have I couldn't get everybody else's, so it wasn't quite very good.
So what you want are the addresses.
Yeah, everybody's email address who's
Name
coming
and-
to this.
Name and email.
Name and email address. Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Did everybody else get the emails I sent out?
Are they coming from you or Mark?
Me.
Oh, I don't think I'm reading them for you.
Okay, then.
Should we still write our name down if we're getting your emails?
Yeah, because I want to make sure that
Make a new list.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, we'll try it again. Let's see if we can do it with 4 lines as a group. So I'll say it, and then we'll see if we can get it with 4 lines. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners.
Blessed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners.
Good. Now the whole thing. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night.
Blessed
is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but delights in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night.
His law. His law.
Is it and who ponders?
And who ponders his law day and night. Very good. Very good. Very good. You got one stanza. 2 weeks, one stanza. Just 3 more.
We'll be done by the end.
We'll be done by the end, yeah.
With one song.
Yeah. Now, of course, look, if you do these on your, if you practice this on your own, you can knock out. I mean, so I've got, and I'm going to give it to you, and I can't force anybody to do homework, but I've got about 35 psalms compiled that I think anybody can reasonably do in a year and have them rote. All right? And I picked them because I just used an AI, and I said, look, tell me what the most...
Check.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and that and like 2 other ones. But I said, basically, what's the most common psalms in the current liturgy? What's the most common psalms in the old liturgy? What are the most important psalms? And then I did it. What are the most, like I did, what's most mentioned in the new, what's most used in the New Testament? And what's most important? And then I added the 3 psalms that they left out of the contemporary office. And a couple of other things that were important. Father basically suggested that all of the penitential psalms be added. So I did it. And then a couple of other things that a couple of my theologically gifted friends told me were of particular importance. But by the time I had gotten that far in, you only had me 1 or 2 more. So I'll give you a couple of those for the end. But the way it breaks down is about 2 or 3 every month. There's no reason you can't. I think 118 is incredibly long, so that might be a challenge. I think 118 is on there.
Can you tell me all the which ones?
I'll give it to you. You don't
Okay.
need, not today.
Okay.
But I'm telling you that I've got a set prepped for people, and that if you want to work on it, if you come back to me next year, you ought to be able to have gotten it done. And not for me, not because you're going to pass. This is not the ACTs of the church. I mean, in a way, it is, but I'm not. I'm not. You're not putting an application into me. It's for the sake of spiritual growth, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Also, by the way, you just memorized the core passage for what justifies the kind of prayer we're going to teach you. Namely, say, why do we do mental prayer? Well, the Psalm says, blessed indeed is the man who ponders the law of God day and night. How do you ponder the law of God day and night?
Think about it.
Yeah. You meditate on it. You meditate on it. Here. All right. Let's start we're going to start the class proper.
I was gonna say in choir, if you listen to the communion hymn, we do something very similar.
What did you say?
So during communion, we have a communion hymn we'll sing. That's where we sing the versicles.
Yeah.
And essentially, we always have the same reciting tones. No matter what it is, it's the same pattern.
Is that the Latin Mass or the Novus Ordo?
For Latin Mass, I'm not sure if they do it for the Novus
Yeah, I was
Ordo.
gonna say like.
Mary Weaver does run the Novus Ordo Mass too, so she might do something very similar.
Lord, hear my prayer. Let us pray. Ineffable Creator, who from the treasures of your wisdom have established 3 hierarchies of angels, have arrayed them in marvelous order above the fiery heavens, and have marshaled the regions of the universe with such artful skill. You are proclaimed the true font of light and wisdom, and the primal origin raised high beyond all things. Pour forth a ray of your brightness into the darkened places of my mind. Disperse from my soul the twofold darkness into which I was born, sin and ignorance. You make eloquent the tongues of infants. Refine my speech and pour forth upon my lips the goodness of your blessing. Grant to me keenness of mind, capacity to remember, skill in learning, subtlety to interpret, and eloquence in speech. May you guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to completion. You who are true God and true man, who live and reign, world without end. Amen. All right. So, oh yeah, and we have our book. Let's see where we were. Last week we did the lion. This week is the bull. And remember, we're doing the tetramorph, which is the angelic figure from Ezekiel and John with the face of an eagle, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of a man. We'll go ahead and 1, 2, 3, 4. Go ahead and pass this around. It's just 4 pages. Start on the bull, because it's got the nice little images. And just flip up 4 pages and circle it back around. Now, if you recall from last week, I told you we're reading from this. We're reading from this because I'm trying to go different routes into opening up sacred imagination. So last week we talked about all the senses. Why did I do this? Because I have a Thomistic psychology. And a Thomistic psychology breaks the mind down into faculties. And so last week we talked about the basic human faculties of the mind. So we talked about imagination, we talked about memory, we talked about sense, we talked about will, we talked about intellect. The one thing I left out was the estimative sense. It's sometimes called animal intelligence. I didn't talk to you about how to purify the estimative sense because it's a little difficult, but in the estimative sense is that part of your intellect that gives you such deliverances as when you walk into, if a giant guy walks into a room, the estimative sense is the thing that says that guy's a threat immediately. You just you esteem it, you size him up, and you go, it's the thing that goes, is that basically it shoots it up to the intellect and goes, figure out if that guy's going to be a problem. You understand what I'm saying? It's the thing that delivers all those little immediate evaluations to you. It's hard. There's not much literature on it, and I'll say that because it really wasn't anything that was worked on in the spiritual history until, recently. And I'll say that psychologically, the main area where you have to deal with purifying the estimative sense is in dealing with advertisement and news media. So the big discovery of the 20th century in advertisement is that you can tinker around with people's estimative sense. You can get them to size things up differently through various kinds of tricks, and the news media uses the same thing. So you can repeat stimuli to people 4, 5, 6, 7 times, and their estimative sense of things change. And so you, since we talked about purifying all the other things, get your imagination right. You need to start to think about things in terms of how God orders things. You need to start to imagine things in terms of the images God gives you. We talk about get your senses clean. You need to look at the right things. Have the right stimulation. We talked about fasting, for instance, to get your your desires in order. We're talking about memory. Why do you want to memorize scripture? Why do you want to have scripture on your heart? So that what comes to mind from memory is sacred things. With the estimative sense, I would only say, look, when we all know when we have things that are attempting to meddle with us, like trying to play with us, trick us, and manipulate us, it is good to avoid those things. it is only good to submit to. This is a thing I don't think that spiritual writings dealt with very well at all, because it's new. But it's only good to submit to a habituating rule. Like the rule of Saint Benedict is a habituating rule. It's only good to submit to a habituating practice when you know that it has good purpose. And so when you start to see, manipulative advertisements, things like that, you should probably avoid them. They probably mess with you in a way that's not good for you. And how to get out of it, it's difficult. I would, it's just sort of fasting at a certain point. You need to get away from, if you get caught up in those things, especially now with online with the algorithms and stuff. There's a very weird thing that they've engineered. And you should be careful with it. It's to say you can't use those devices, but you should be careful to realize how you're manipulated. Is the book come back around?
It's back there.
Okay, they're still working on it.
That was my fault. I didn't know we were supposed to pass it around.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just kind of got it. I was like, oh, neat. And I just had it for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I let everybody look at it because I don't have 12 copies of it. Oh, very good. Yeah, and I'll coordinate that with the other race. Did anybody use the videos in those big email? Y'all use them? Okay, all right. Because I'm very good at those, and I'll send you 20 of them. But I don't want to send. I don't want to be some old lady with chain letters or something.
Only send it back.
Yeah.
You get the blessing.
And if I send you a bunch of links to videos or whatever, I don't expect you to listen to all of those. It's just sort of like, look, this expounds more on. I might have, because look, I have a synthetic and compendious mind, so I've got a whole bunch of stuff in my head, and each thing I talk about or mention could be an hour on its own. So what I'll try to do, if I recall to mind what I was talking about, is I'll go through and I might start going, well, look, I talked about this, here's a video on that. I talked about that, here's a video on that. I talked about this, here's a video on that. And, if you're not interested in those topics, don't worry about it. But it sort of helps expand things out.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You talked about trying to discern whether or not marketing that is played towards us from algorithms and that sort of stuff is, we have to determine whether it's good or bad. Does the AI, chat GPs and all the stuff, how do we determine that these are things that we could use that are good or bad?
I'll just tell you, chat GPT's filter is suspect at best. It has a filter over the top of it, and it's got 2 layers on it. So its first layer was the training. They of course they take out a bunch. I'm sure they went through all sorts of gross stuff from 4chan and said had their poor Zaire slaves cut out what is not acceptable according to their metrics from the training. But also they've got some top line filters that take stuff out. So you can already demonstrate that it has a certain political slant. I've caught it. So it's actually weird about religious topics. It doesn't try to. It's pretty good with any. It has a problem with genericity. So like once I try to get it to drill into any theological topic, it's not very good at it. But like in terms of being able to tell you the basic stuff from the catechism and stuff, it's pretty good. In fact, you could probably follow up. You could probably follow up to second order level of details with questions before it gets too generic, and you want to go, it's too generic. But it's usually not distortive. It doesn't give you heresy. But you can tell when you press it to do comparisons, or when you press it, like if you want to say something negative about another faith, if you wanted to evaluate critically another faith, it's very bad at that, and it's pretty clear to me that it's got some kind of.
Yeah, you're not allowed to criticize any other religion, but you are allowed to criticize Christianity, and in particular Catholicism, and that's kind of like the general rule of our society. So that's the general rule within the, you know.
Sometimes it'll get a little, if you try to get it to Prada, it'll get a little weird about putting any religious figure in a negative light. I think it doesn't want bad press. So I don't know, but that's not going to get better. That's going to get worse. So you just have to be aware of that. I mean, when you have to use these manipulative tools, the good thing with this is front end manipulation, and you just know that doesn't match your. That's like telling you, up is down and left is right. I mean, you just know that's straightforward manipulation. That doesn't screw with the estimative sense. That's just lying to you. And most people are good with lying to me. They go, that's a lie. But with advertisement and with news media and with the algorithms, it's more about controlling what you think, what you expect to show up. Advertising times things in a certain way. It'll show you things subtly 10 times until you expect something. That's the whole. That's a principle of conditioning that these things operate on.
Okay, so you're getting into rhetoric, like political advertisement. He's wearing the colors of the American flag. He's trying to subtly impress on you that he's a patriot, so that you'll vote for him.
Or like.
Applied to other products.
Or you do the negative attack ad, and it has Michael Storch. What is all the is the worst person in the world, if you just read Michael Storch, the worst person in the world. I mean, the whole point of the music is to force your sense of things to go. This is a malevolent guy, that's real. That's real top line manipulation. But with algorithms, it's gotten very sophisticated because it presents it as just showing you information. But really, it gets you on a track, and then you think that it starts to shape how you expect things to be.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah,
So-
that's weird.
Well, it's like iPhone ads. It's like showing happy middle class people using this tool.
Yeah.
Using
Yeah.
happy because using the tool. So,
That's weird, and not good for you.
Yeah.
Not good for you.
I mean, you said something along the lines of like top line things were, easily to discern, like that's a lie, but I've actually found that what you're talking about has gotten people to literally look at untrue things and say that they are true through this kind of conditioning to like almost a mind-boggling degree. Like you say, like people will literally say untruths and their adherence to the untruth is so vehement that you could even show them the direct evidence of its own truth and it does nothing.
I should have a qualification. So when I say it's top line and obvious, I mean from our perspective. So you should keep in mind. So the church has basically only mastered, in conservative parts of the church, has only mastered being a counterculture. And all that counterculture is good at doing is saying no to top line manipulation. That's it. Now, and what's top line manipulation? Top line manipulation is the thing that goes,
Trans women are women.
yeah, just lie to me, or obvious, or even the stupid political with the dumb tone and the guy and the malevolent voice. But what does top line manipulation consist of? Trying to convince me or manipulating me into believing something I immediately know is not correct. But the reason that top line manipulation works on certain people is because they've already been subject to a second order level of manipulation. That is to say, they've already accepted a set of priors, an arranged way of viewing things, that then when they see a top line manipulation, they might go, that's a little superficial and dumb, but that's the thing we say.
Yeah.
And you'll find even for us, you'll find that, so if the counterculture is not incompatible with the top line thing, you'll see people repeat back, dumb things that they heard on, that's obviously stupid and You
Well,
know.
there's this thing such as called mass psychosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is we're subject to that too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I won't get it, but I mean, during COVID, you know, and I'm not saying the COVID restrictions were good things, but you know, on generally speaking, on this side, this sort of idea was, well, these are manipulations and this is not good. But then you'd see people repeat weird top item things that, you know, why are we saying this? Well, we're saying this because we've all accepted some second order thing that we need to be talking about this, and it's not any better when we do it. At all. You're just being manipulated by some other thing. And ultimately, it's kind of, you know, because why are we really concerned about that? Because, you know, we're concerned about, in a certain way, we're concerned about being manipulated by demons. Well, you know, if Google, you know, if Apple can manipulate you with stupid word strategies, the demons can manipulate you with stupid word strategies. You understand? So this is why it's a level you have to be aware of.
So, I don't know if anybody's watched that Michael Knowles interview of
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exorcist.
Yep.
Yeah.
Talk about ChatGPT, and a couple times it became very demonic.
Yeah.
No.
I kind of maintain that. I mean, I work in commercial appraisal, and I use it. I have to write like really long reports, and I use ChatGPT just to rewrite something that I find is not worded correctly. But I definitely don't go to it for information and say like, oh, like, tell me X, Y, or Z, because I know like it's also based on a learning algorithm, and it's pulling information from the internet, which itself might not be true. Like I understand what he's saying about it, but I also feel like, okay, well, I can still use this as a tool to just like
Oh, I
clear
mean-
up my language and my syntax, you know.
Yeah.
Let me be clear. I used it for, I mean, when did we start this year? In November?
No, it was before that. September.
Okay, it became readily accessible to me in December. I think I used it for most of the course as an assistant. But what I found out pretty quick was, like, I would be like, okay, because I, you know, sometimes I get a topic I hadn't done it before, and I'd be like, okay, write me a talk.
Yeah.
It can do it, but I know more than enough about the topic to it's terrible. It has genericity creep. It just says the worst summary of the catechism on the topic, and it's not very good or insightful or helpful. It's like you had your dumb friend who can write okay
Right. You're not,
write me an essay about something he didn't know anything about.
So it's just a very basic of basic.
Yeah, it doesn't even get Wikipedia level good on something. Because it's dull and bad, and I would never deliver that to you. And so but it was good. It's super good at like outlines. It's really good at that. It's pretty bullet points, outlines. If you give it a text and say summarize this, it's pretty good at that. You have to watch it because it doesn't know what's significant.
right.
So if the text is subtle, and it has if you got a big block of text, and the most important key sentence is in the middle, and it's not obviously contained in everything else around it, you say summarize this. There's a good chance it's going to cut the most important text out and not retain it at all.
Well, it's a natural language
Yeah,
processor. It doesn't understand what it's doing.
it's a probability. It's Bayesian probability association plus some filters.
What's weird with me, so it's trained on programming, it's trained to read code essentially. So what I'm trying to apply it for is not at all theology, but it's like giving it the architectural diagrams to use and having it write the code that it already knows how to write because it's been trained on it.
Oh, that's cool.
Do you know coding at all? Like
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a programmer.
I would because I know it writes weird convoluted code sometimes. So always have it tell you why it did that.
Yeah, it'll get 90% there. So what I found is you like
Yeah,
do
you
the,
end up.
you do the foundation, you just do the fine tuning on it.
What language? What language?
Well, I work with infrastructure, so it's been called Terraform.
Oh, okay.
But I work
So,
know
like,
about 30
the
languages.
biggest like cheat to have it write C++. Like, I would have done that in college. I would have used that so much. Oh my goodness.
All right, back to the thing. Now again, we're trying to get the imagination going. And I give you this because, now granted this is a modern book. But this is a modern book looking back at medieval bestiaries. But as they say, looking back at how the Christian tradition has why did I pick this? Because I got another one called, it's not in here. I've got another one called The Vulnerary of Christ, which looks at the mysterious wounds of Christ and their place in Christian symbolism. And that's another thing. But I chose the best theory because you've seen a bull. It's just a cow. You know?
Bull.
Yeah.
Cow is technically female.
Yeah, you've seen an eagle, you know. It's just a big bird, you know, and the sort of point is that like they see this much in what you would just go, that's a big old dumb cow, you know, that's a big old dumb bird, you know. That's why it's important to me, because at a certain point, when you begin to take Scripture in and you begin to change the mind. Sometimes in Protestant circles, they said when you begin to establish a biblical worldview, which is the most middle American thing I ever heard in my life. But when you begin to establish a biblical worldview, the things that you see in the world, the way that you arrange the way that you intellect the world, the way that your mind begins to put things together, changes. And so one can see more things in something like a big dumb critter in the field. You understand? I mean, because again, so we'll put it at the very basic level. Remember that everything is a purposeful creation of God. Okay? That's words we say, and that's a thing we believe as a proposition. It's a fact. But in terms of like, does that shape how you actually look at anything? You know? And it ought to. I mean, same way, like, look, you know, I mean, this, if you want to make an analogy, there's a big difference between, you know, you think a thing is a machine. If you think, I don't know, the only time this happens in ordinary speech, it's like something like chemistry. You know, you know that there are synthetic substances that people make in a lab, okay? And you might look at it, if it was on the ground or something, I think it's a big pile of mud or something. And then if I said, no, that's a big pile of chemicals that were made in a lab, you would look at that pile of mud totally different. Because you would immediately become aware that because it was engineered, it was designed in a certain way, it might have occult properties that you need to be aware of. Well, it's the same thing when you become aware that God has created everything providentially ordered to his grace and purposes. Well, then even things like birds and dogs and cats and dumb big cows start to have, you know, you just go, well, how does this fit into grace? How does this fit into God's providential ordering? You know, and the reason, in a certain way, the cosmic problem of evil, that is to just say, I don't see how the world should be like this, becomes more and more salient, the more and more disenchanted, that is to say, the more and the less and less created the world seems. You understand? Like when it's perfectly obvious to ancient man that all of the world is providentially ordered by God, it very rarely occurs to people to go, hey, well, you know, this is just all random nonsense happening. You know, it's clear that you're reading Job, and he runs into the problem of evil, but it's got to be. He's never like, oh, you got all these stars just bumping around in each other, and you got, you know, it's just rocks tumbling down a hill. It's not on that level. It's not the naturalistic problem of evil for Job. It's the personal problem of evil. It's why should, you know, after all this significance, you know, after all this significant thing I've gone through, why should the narrative of my life come to, seem to be a pile of straw? And then God has to say, were you there when I made the universe? You know, what you have no ability to start from the position of where God is to intellect the full purposes. But that's already 3 levels deep into the religious imaginary. That's on the level of high significance. His family's collapsed, his position is collapsed, his dignity is collapsed. Before he begins to go, there's disorder here. We start at, you know, the river is a big pile of disorder. You know, the stars are a big pile of disorder. It's an abomination. You know, you talk about, it's an abomination to the ancient mind to go this bunch of big balls of gas floating around in random. Not because that's just a thing we say that's blasphemy, because it's obvious. You look up and it's incredibly magnificently ordered. They just say it's obvious that it's divinely ordered. Look at it for the ancient mind. That's the distance we have. Go ahead.
You're talking about, like, you know, you're looking at an animal, like a bull, and thinking of it something more than just like a big dumb animal. Is that we should like prioritize? Is it because like an animal is a living thing, and we should look at it a little differently than like looking at something that is not sentient, or the pile of rocks? Like, there's an animal like.
No, I'm saying that when you get
spiritual content or something.
I'm saying that when you get deep enough into this, everything is that.
Okay.
Every single object. I mean,
Created object by God.
yeah, every single thing. I mean, at the philosophical level, even rocks and twigs and dirt have final purpose. Tele have final purposes, are ordered towards something. I mean, people don't like to think about this, but the fact that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade is a final cause, is a purpose, is a design, is an end of the thing. That dumb matter is disposed to do that unfailingly under such and such circumstances. That's an order of things. But in modern imaginary, these kinds of purposes are dropped, and then you only want to hold on to life and then human things, human designs. I mean, very fundamentally, even dirts and rocks and twigs are purposive. But that's hard for many people to imagine. But ultimately, everything has to be this. But what I have to get you there, I have to get you there because, look, I want you to be able to do something like absorb the liturgy. Well, the liturgy is, he's praying, you went through it. You went through the, he's got a big candle. Every part of that's significant. He carves letters into it and crosses it. It's significant. Every Mass, you have bread up there is supposed to be significant. The way the man stands is supposed to be significant. The gestures he makes is supposed to be significant. These are mundane things, as mundane as a guy standing up there moving around. Bread and wine are the most mundane. This was always the case, that bread and wine are the most mundane food objects. Most mundane, most banal, most common. But they are invested with very particular significance. You're baptized with what? Water. Not water infused with gold flecks or something, not water from the ambrosial hills or something. No, just some water, clean water, most ordinary substance. And it's made the most important thing. We have that all through the church. But you have to begin to be able to, to start to glean on to the fact that everything in your ordinary existence is ordered providentially towards God, to begin to grasp why that would even be done. Does that start to make a little sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question related to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is something that I actually struggle with very deeply when I look at the natural world, and I'll give you an example of this. There is a wasp that exists that eats frogs, and how it does that is that it injects the frog with a paralyzing agent that also liquefies it, and then it literally drinks the liquefied insides of the frog. And
Yeah.
that's how it survives, right?
Yeah.
When I look at the natural world, I cannot, and how much suffering there is in it between the various animal species, I cannot reconcile that with a purposeful creation of a loving God. And it's something and I don't know if it's that way because of the sin of Adam, that it wasn't going to be that way initially. That's very difficult to say that a loving God created these things to function in this way is very difficult to wrap my mind around. I don't know if it's something you just try to accept on the surface and then you eventually understand it.
So there's the negative and positive way. And if you want to, by the way, I to have a course. I have a theology reading group at 2 p.m. From about 1 p.m. until about 3 or 4 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It just got put on the schedule. So if you want to do things like read about sit down and read about the problem of evil, I'll do that with you. But there's two ways to approach something like that. This we're just hovering in on the problem of evil. There's the negative way and the positive way. The positive way is theodicy. So that's the question of, look, what in fact is the purpose of grace operating in this particular case? I thought you were actually going to use the parasitic wasp that takes over the mind and brain, and then.
Well, there's another example. I mean, there are countless examples in the animal world of this going on. As we, it's horrific, and it almost feels evil to me that should exist.
The negative answer is always, look, because of the disparity between cause and effect. So God is so great and so fundamental. His greatness far exceeds any particular finite evil that you can imagine. And therefore, any particular evil that you might observe, God can redeem. That is to say, God can turn around to greater purpose. Now, but then you want to say, well, what's the purpose? So, of course, I don't know. But you want to say, look, in the eternity of things, of course, what does he do with it? I don't know. But in the eternity of things, God can make good on it. He has to be able to. I mean, he's omnipotent. He can do so. It's in his power. How? I don't know. I mean,
I think I might.
well, I'll get there. But I mean, let me sort of do it hypothetically and imaginatively, and then if you want to give a concrete case, you can give, because there is a sort of immediate natural order. But I want to. People start to get, because you want to say, like, why do we have earthquakes or volcanoes or storms? And you go, well, you need water to go to places, and you need, if you want to begin to do the theodicy part on a basic level, why do asteroids clock into things and somebody dies, and why does lightning strike and somebody? Well, because you need a weather system, and you need things operating, and you need things revolving. You need gravity to work. That's why people fall down. But if we didn't have gravity, nothing would work. And so you could start to answer. But what people are striving at when they're talking about the parasitic wasp or the deer that is born with deformed and then cries for a few hours and dies, things like that. They're asking about why but they're asking about why the superfluous. What they're driving at is a superfluous case. It doesn't seem necessary to the environment that have to go, and so. It's sort of, you want to say, look, I don't know. I don't know what the mechanics God does to redeem that. I mean, look, if you want to begin to imagine immediately, you have to keep in mind that we don't just have the visible world and its purposes, but also the invisible world. I don't know if God chastises a demon with the death of a fawn. I have no idea. Maybe he does. Maybe demons are in some sense spiritually restrained by that kind of suffering. I don't know what invisible glories there are on the side of the natural world. And I don't say that merely as consoling. We literally don't know what the spiritual mechanics are of things that we look at and we don't fully comprehend. Because God isn't just, we have a central dominion place in creation, but obviously we're not the entire story. And so God's internal invisible story for things like that, or whatever goes on at the center of the earth, or whatever goes on, on the other side of Mars, that's an invisible story that we can't comprehend. That is a story between him and the principalities and powers, and we won't know that into the last day. It's difficult, but. That's about faith, and not faith in the blind trust sense, but faith in the look. Well, we've come to accept what God is, and we've come to know who God is, and so that we know that his loving purposes extend into the invisible world even when I can't penetrate it. And the difficulty there is still coming to peace, because it is a peace with it. It's the same. It's the same. This is why we have the analogy of our Father. Why is he our Father? Well, because your Father does things that are beyond your comprehension, and you have to ultimately trust in your Father to keep the house. And you're a child and you don't know. And you won't know until you can see face to face with the Father. And all the difficulty in families in the world comes from, I feel I can't trust my father. But we know in this case that it's a father who keeps his promises and can't but. But that doesn't mean that I understand.
Right.
I can't do the taxes. That does the taxes.
I was gonna say, I don't know if it's particular to your case, but definitely predation, let's say herbivores eat plants, carnivores eat herbivores,
Herbivores.
other carnivores. But I forget where I was reading this, but this I guess has to go with pre-fall way of thinking of the natural world,
Right.
is that there is a principle that it is more glorious to God that the organism be more well ordered, and the only way to get that is to. So it's the idea like the purpose of grass is to be eaten so that it can give glory to the cows too.
Well, yeah. So you've got
There's a level of
you do have a natural order of. So you've got a natural order of stratification that expresses itself in sort of hierarchies of eating and being eaten, of consumption, and so that's part of the story. But we also want to hone in on case of what was looked at as superfluous stuff.
Yeah.
And I want to go ahead because we're way out in space and we got it out. All right, let me try to do this. The bull. On reading the Old Testament from beginning to end, one is impressed by the innumerable throngs of victims that the patriarchs and their sons, the Hebrews, sacrificed to God. Exodus and Leviticus liturgically codified these sacrifices where sometimes hundreds of victims were slaughtered at the same time. One of the reasons for these impressive holocausts is given in the sacred text. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that maketh an atonement for your soul. Also, I wanted to briefly, there's an image. So during Passover time, when they're slaughtering the lambs, it's not like one, In Jerusalem, you're talking thousands of lambs, and they're eaten, of course. You slaughter them and you truss them up, and they're the altar. This is a little profane, but it has to be clear. The altar is a big barbecue, basically. So they're trussed up on a. It's important because the lambs were slaughtered and trussed up on down the middle, opened up, and on a cross, basically trussed open. And since there were thousands, there was an outlet for the blood, and it would come out during the height of the sacrificial season. It would come out in a big torrent out the side of the temple, a big blood torrent. First of all, you want to think about this imagery of sacrifice. The lamb that's slaughtered is trussed up as a cross, but also blood comes out the side of the temple. It's flowing water. That's the Christ, the blood that comes out the side of Christ. Christ is just the imagery of the new, because it's a very weird passage in the New Testament where it's basically, I say this to you because I saw it and you wouldn't believe it. He has that weird preface. It says the blood flows out the side. Why is that significant? It's weird to say. Why is it significant? Because Christ is just to a Jewish audience literally the image of the temple or in a sacrifice. Whether as an offering under the knife of the sacrifices of Israel or in the mythic sanctuaries of the Gentiles, where often the victim was a human being, the ritual outpouring of blood flowed in ceremonies of all kinds, of glorification, of initiation and propitiation, of atonement and gratitude. These are also the functions that Catholic theology attributes to the mysterious sacrifice of the body and blood of Jesus Christ on the altar, which took the place of the abolished sacrifices of the ancient Mosaic law. It is this substitution that brought about the acceptance in the signs and symbols of Christianity of the beasts of the Holocaust, the ancient so-called victims as appropriate symbols of the Savior sacrificed for humanity on Golgotha. The blood of numerous animals was shed before the altar of Yahweh. That is, the dove, the kid, the he-goat, the lamb, the cow, the heifer, and the calf. But the principal victim was the ox. In the mythological conceptions of ancient Egypt, the ox or bull was one of the symbols through which the supreme god Ammon was adored in Thebes. In a hymn of this cult engraved on a piece of pottery in the British Museum, Ammon is summoned in the name of the celestial bull. In ancient times, because of its universal character as a symbol of fertility and the symbolic similarity between the shape of its horns and the lunar crescent, the head of the bull was offered and treated separately in Egyptian sacrifices, and its image was worn on amulets. These amulets have been found in many places in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and attest to the general character of the ancient connection of the bull and other horned animals to human fecundity and the cult of the moon. In Egypt, the sacred bull, as well as being the incarnation of the god Ammon, was also that of the god Ptah, for it was the personification of the divine life force renewing itself unendingly in nature. Perhaps this is why, on the well-known zodiac of Dennereth, the ox is portrayed on its knees with the key of life, the ankh, around its neck. The rather complex mythologies of Assyria, Chaldea, Media, and Susiana placed the symbolic bull in relation with celestial influences and even with the divine nature, and the deified bull was portrayed with a human face. The impressive man-headed oxen, the cherubim of Assyria, adorned with jewel tiaras like the sovereigns and pontiffs of their countries, and provided with great wings like eagles, are well known. The wingless human oxen, however, represents the infernal monster Eabani. And whatever the ancient commentators on the Bible may have thought, it is completely possible, if not certain, that in Israel, the gold cherubim, which covered the Ark of the Covenant with their wings, and those on Solomon's temple, were oxen more or less similar to those of the Assyrians. In the Assyrio-Babylonian pantheon, the gods who specifically were empowered to control thunderstorms was named Adad. He was the lord of celestial fire. His symbol was the bull, whose charge is impetus like that of a storm and whose voice evokes rumble of thunder. There is a stele that shows us Adad riding on his symbolic ox with one foot on its hindquarters and the other on its forehead. In the splendid work of the theology of the Greeks, Victor Mangen specifies that oxen were sacrificed to Poseidon, black like his garments, because the noise of the sea, his empire, like the bellowing of the bull, is a result of powerful breathing. The mysterious cults of Mithra and Orpheus ascribed to the immolation of the bull such a special power of purification and propitiation that the bull sacrifices took on the form and the sacramental liturgy of a kind of baptism of blood. Consider this impressive rite. In an excavation hollowed out under a floor made of latticed wood on which the sacrificers slaughtered the bound animals, there stands naked the candidate to receive the benefits of the initiation and the purification through contact with the ritual blood. Through the slats in the wood, says Prudentius, the blood falls into the hollow, and the initiate turns his head towards the drops of the fall. He exposes his entire body to them. He leans backwards so that they may sprinkle his face, his ears, his lips, and his nostrils. He immerses his eyes in the warm liquid, and not even sparing his palate, inundates his tongue on the blood and drinks avidly. Then, when the last agonized tremors have emptied the veins of the powerful victim and his life is extinguished, the initiated one emerges from the excavation dripping with blood and offers himself to the veneration of the people, who believe him purified by this scarlet baptism and brought close now to divinity. Today, near the falls of Zambeze, a cruel custom still proclaims the belief in the virtues of hot living bovine blood. The bull or ox has a ligature around its neck. A well-directed arrow causes abundant bleeding. The black native fills a horn with the blood and then drinks it with gusto. For other animals, it is from a large cut with blood gushing from it that the natives come to drink as they would from a cup. The beast is then sewn up again and frolics once more in the midst of the herd. Today also in Laos, the buffalo is solemnly sacrificed in order to ask the heavens to foretell the future of humanity. Repeatedly, but with lapses of time between each stab, so that the death will be slow, the sacrificer plunges a large spear into the flank of the animal, and the way in which the buffalo falls and dies indicates to the people whether the year will be good or bad, peaceful or troubled. One might believe that the domesticated bull, like the male buffalo or the wild bison, earned human respect through the fear it inspired. In the drawings engraved on the walls of prehistoric caves, as in the most beautiful Greek works of art, the bull poses as the powerful chief of the herd. These ancient testimonials well portray its strength, the speed of its charge, its fury, its sexual passion, the imposing gravity of its motionless stance. Nonetheless, it was more as the herd's prolific sire than as its formidable leader that the bull was valued by the people of the first human societies. Throughout Asia, it was always the embodiment of all the psychic and physical energies which constitute the driving force in the lives of all beings. In Egypt, the image of the bull was the hieroglyph of the world, fertility, and for the Greeks, he was the symbol of the creative force. All the cults of the ancient peoples of Iran and Chaldea, who brought us astronomy, celebrated the ram and the bull, the fathers of the herds, as the spring signs of the zodiac. But is it true, as it has been said, that this symbolism came from these regions of Asia and later spread to Egypt and Europe? I prefer to think, on the contrary, that it was born of itself wherever primitive man became hunter and then herdsman. Before Brahmanism appeared in Tibet and India, before the Sumerians made their rich amulets, even before the civilizations of Babylonia, Nivea, or Susa were born, the aborigines of the northern slopes of the Pyrenees modeled the clay bison of the cave of the Two Brothers and engraved the superb oxen of the Magdalene caverns of France and Spain. Relying principally on the visions of Ezekiel and St. John, our first Christian symbolists depicted the ox and the other three animals, eagle, lion, and man, as hieroglyphs of Jesus Christ. Other French authors of the Middle Ages who fell heir to their way of thinking are equally explicit in this point. Taurus, bull, Christos, writes Rabanus Marius. And after him, St. Bruno de Asti and St. Yves of Chartres say the same thing. Thus they saw the ox as the symbol of the redeeming victim, which, through the complete outpouring of his blood, assured the purification of our race and its reconciliation with justice from above. But another less well-known symbolism related the symbolic figure of the ox to the personage of Christ. A close study of the iconography of Jesus Christ in the first 13th century shows that, among many others, there were two dominating ideas that had a considerable influence. One portrays him as the source and hearth of light, and the other as those of life. He is the illuminating word, the word which shed the first light onto the chaos of the world, the word whose doctrine illuminates the soul. He is also the word which is the creator of life and the first principle whose fertilizing strength spreads and perpetuates physical life in the natural order on earth, and whose grace produces spiritual life in the supernatural order. Thus, from him, the initial source, emerges the sensible life of the body and the supersensible life of the soul. This mystical conception was echoed in the liturgy, in sacred literature and art, and also in Christian symbolism, in the form of the ox, the ram, and the stag. Here perhaps we should call to mind the Spanish bullfight, which, however imperfectly, compares the bull to the Redeemer marching towards death. In Tauromachy, the Veronica Pass, which consists of holding the cape in front of the bull's face, is named for the compassionate woman. In the legend which has sprung up around what was told in the Gospel, who offered her veil to the exhausted Savior. It was in compositions of an apocalyptic nature above all that the bull lent his image to Satan and personified the works of hell. That is, a medieval manuscript, for example, shows us Satan in the form of a being with the head of a lion, the body and horns of a bull, bat wings, and eagle's claws. In Veneers, near Loudun, a church cornice from the end of the Roman period shows a variation of the basilisk, an ox with the head of a cock. In superb 14th century book from Count Ashburn's collection, the Babylonian god Bel is represented with a head that is half human, half ox-like, a hairy torso and legs of a vulture. This last creation of the Near Eastern imagination coincides, coincidentally enough, with the sacred iconography of Babylonia in the time of Daniel. The cylindrical seals of other Chaldean documents of this period show us, in fact, the monster Ebenai and the other manifestations of evil in the form of horned men with the hindquarters of an oxen. Unrelated to this type of iconography, the representations of sea oxen or dragon-like oxen with snake-like or fish-shaped bodies are also images of evil monsters which are living vehicles of the evil spirit. To the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Canaanites, and their neighbors, Molech was an evil god represented as having a human body with a bull's head. Some of his statues made of bronze were colossal and hollow. His cult ordained in certain circumstances that they should be filled with children before setting fire to the logs surrounding them and heating the statues in a glowing red. In spite of the prohibition of Leviticus, thou shalt not take any of thy seed to pass through the fire of Molech. It was by subscribing to this abominable cult that Solomon and Manasseh, kings of Israel, committed a sin that brought about the apostasy of the Israelites until Jonah put an end to these horrors. Long before our era, Achaean mythology had for its own part imagined the Minotaur, a being strangely resembling the ox-headed monsters of Chaldea. Like them, this creature represented the antithesis of the cherubim, the divine winged oxen with human faces of Assyria, in which we can see the images of the divine power uniting material force with intelligence. According to Homer, Minos, king of Crete, was the son of Jupiter and the nymph of Europa, but he did not fill his obligations to the divine powers. For this, Poseidon punished him by inspiring his wife Persephone, a monstrous passion for the miraculous bull which he had failed to sacrifice to the gods. From this unnatural union there was born the Minotaur, who had the head of an ox and the body of a giant man. Like the Ebenini of the Chaldeans and Baal of the Syro-Phoenicians, the Minotaur became the curse of the island of Crete, and Minos had him locked up in the labyrinth of Knossos with the Greeks, conquered by the body of the king of Crete, who required periodically to bring him 7 boys and 7 girls to devour. Finally, the Greek hero Theseus, with the help of the enamored Eriene, killed the Minotaur, thus delivering the country from the hateful tribute. Léon Venet sees the story of the Minotaur in it a very ancient solar myth, and Glotz, in accordance with one of the principal symbolic characteristics of the bull, as sire and fertilizer of the herd, presents the Minotaur as the Cretan god of virile strength. He demanded victims, like all divinities, he wrote, but it is not the mythology of the Cretans. It is the legend of foreign peoples, who made out of him a god hungry for human blood. Nevertheless, the Cretan monster has continued to be accepted as one of the representations of the evil spirit, and Theseus, his conqueror, who delivered Greece from his oppression, was sometimes likened by Christian teachers to Christ, the liberator of souls. So I'll give a gloss, and then you can reflect, and then we'll talk about at least verbal prayer, because we drug out a little bit. So, but it's important because I'm trying to finish up from the last lesson about faculties of the imagination. So keep in mind so we've begun to, first of all, what's very important is that all of the ancient religions have what I'm talking about as the religious imaginary. So they all, it's not just some special thing we came up with and then everybody else was natural or something. All the ancient divinities see in the place and action and behavior and characteristic of the bull something of the virility of life, something of fertility, something of the continuing of existence, something of the connection between mundane, meaty, moving around being and the divine. That is to say, look, you sacrifice this thing. You sacrifice this big dumb animal that moves around. And why? Because he's in a certain way the embodiment, the biggest embodiment of life you've ever seen in a certain way. In fact, in ancient Europe, the cow, the bull that we have, is descended from the auroch. The auroch is like a cow or a bull, but about twice the size. Is the huge bovine-like wild animals that used to live in Europe that we eventually domesticated. But sort of in primitive European life, this would have been a glorious animal. And if you went out on hunt, you'd take 5-10 guys to take this thing down, and it would have been the most glorious animal you ever saw. And it would have fed the whole village, and it would have just been almost a miraculous, life-giving food miracle to take this thing down. And on top of being a great struggle, and a wild animal like that if you've ever been hunting, a wild animal like that is an impressive they're impressive animals to hunt, especially with a spear or an arrow.
It's like a bison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not playing around with. It's not some stupid turkey or it's not like a rifle either where it's just down. It's an extended all day affair to bring the animal down, and you have to understand. One has to see what especially a highly spiritually aware and imaginative people would see on an act like that. And then in the development of religion and into the coming of the spiritual consciousness of Christianity, this gets brought into Christ, who is the ultimate source of life, the ultimate sacrificial blood victim, the ultimate redeemer of things, and the ultimate connection between life and God and divinity. And that's a very rough sketch, but I wanted to sketch it because you see the movement, begin to see the movement of the natural thing to the divine thing. You could see those steps as a human being. You could start to see how, if I'm so dependent on hunting that I would start to see this bull creature as importantly related to the spiritual world, as importantly related to what life is, and as importantly a gift from God that needs to be given back to God. It's not immediately obvious given the way we live, but it becomes something intelligible. And as soon as you can start to see, not just memory, we're not reading neat facts, as soon as you can start to see intellectually how that move goes, that's the seed from which you could begin to awaken a religious awareness of the world. Did anybody sort of want to, anybody got a thought off that?
Yeah, that's just really brilliant, tying everything in together the way he does, crossing the different, but as soon as I heard him talking about the relation of the ancient, the way the ancient people saw the bull and the moon, and I used to study a little bit of just astrology, and I think somebody else in here, was it you also knows, you immediately think of when it starts to talk about it, it's in modern astrology, Taurus, that sign is said to be ruled by the lunar, right? So that connection made sense. What did he mean when he said there were some Christian scholars who erroneously followed some line of thought having to do with astrology? I thought it was something along those lines. I'm not sure.
I don't remember. Do you remember the...
Did anybody else catch that? He said, and those who erroneously followed.
The Chaldeans were looked at as, they had their history as the astrologers. And in fact, I think Daniel was actually trained through
But I don't remember the line where he...
oh, okay.
I don't know. But
Was it like when the abominable cult and Solomon did this practice
it
of
was like the-
sacrificing?
I was thinking egregores, the concept of the creation of egregores, which through these thought forms, and you put all this ritual and all this focus and all this incentive and when you were saying it becomes an intelligent thing, like it becomes an entity. That was rolling through my mind, and of course, and he just mentioned the whole, Solomon thing. So,
I mean, sometimes we'll still have this. I remember when, again, I don't want to over-sacralize profane things, but when the internet started, there was a lot of fecund, like The Matrix is a case. Like the first Matrix movie, but it's not even bad. It's a fecund attempt to deal on us, on as close to spiritual as we're willing to get level with this thing that just emerged that we realize is of extreme significance. There's a couple of anime that did the same thing. Ghost in the Shell was earlier, about a decade earlier, trying to deal with digitization. And it's not, when these things, we usually try to, in this culture, we try to kill that pretty quick, but when something new pops up, for about 5 to 10 years, you're allowed to spiritually effervesce before it's crushed as much as possible. We don't like to let you be spiritual for very long. But
The topic on Theseus had me think about something that's kind of tangential, but it's this. You see in Christianity, so I guess you call it the baptismal culture. But with Theseus, there's an interesting one. I forget. I think it's the old tradition of the devotion of Saint Christopher, where he's essentially he's a servant of the old tradition. He's a servant of the devil. He's trying to serve the most powerful man. That's what we think his life goal is. Finds a demon. Demon's like, serve me. Old monk comes by. Demon runs away. He serves that monk. He becomes baptized. And for his penance, he is told to carry like small children across the river. But if you know mythology, that is okay. So as the story goes, he's carrying small children across the river for years and years and years. Finally, the child Christ comes to carry the child across, and each step gets heavier.
Like, wasn't he the one that also actually made it through the underworld of Hades?
Theseus?
Is that the one?
No, I'm talking
It
about
was
Saint
there's-
Christopher right now.
That's
Well-
Orpheus.
Orpheus.
But like,
Yeah.
I thought there was a
Eurydice.
correlation, like, later.
but like from a cultural perspective, what's happening with that story is it's mirroring. I think it's Jason and the Argonauts, where he's carrying Hera across the river. Because you're seeing the. Do you know who it is? I don't remember.
I
who
remember.
it is.
I was
But-
never
so
very
it's
big
essentially
on
it's the
myth.
same plot, but you're seeing that same substitution rather than Theseus. It's Christ, like in the Minotaur story,
Yeah.
and it's a baptism itself of the Greek culture, and it's like we're taking the stories we're telling our children and ordering them back
And
to God to that degree.
what's important, one thing that's important is it's not illegitimate to do that. I mean, you have to do it in an orthodox way. Orthodoxy takes the lead if you do that. And if you don't have the ability to do that, you shouldn't just spontaneously. But there's a temptation to. It's not necessarily legitimate because our spiritual situation, even in a worldly way, has been really messed up. But there's a temptation to want to, especially among conservative religious circles, a temptation to want I want to say purity, but it's not really. It's a sanitary barrier. It's more about sanitization than it is about purity, because purity is proper order to, corrupting things, whereas sanitization might be, but it's also sort of a personal sense of barrier, boundary, but what's clean and isn't clean, and that might be licit and it might not be licit. And of course, when we are incorporating or bringing or baptizing or just like when you're bringing a guy in from the outside, when you're bringing in a convert. I mean, in a certain way, I brought all of you in, or we brought you all in, but we take you, and we evaluate you, and we do some stress tests, and we run you through the thing, and we check you out, and we make sure you're committed, we make sure you're straight, and then we run you through the rites, and then we bring you down here, we see where you are. But it's the same thing with anything we bring in. And so it's not quite right to just go, look, these things over here, here's the things, a wall, and it comes through that. That's not right. That's not how we operate. And it's important because if you don't have some permeability between the culture and the church becomes this weird, not only does it become this weird self-shunted off culture, but it becomes a weird non-community. You just get into weird Amish things at a certain point. And I don't want to insult the Amish because I'm sure they have ways of incorporating, but we can use them as an image of the sect that goes off into its own space. Or even worse, at least they're a fecund. They have a fertile space. Some sects can go off into space and they become infertile and die. Because why? Because in a certain way we're meant to constantly graft people in. We're meant to constantly graft things in to the faith. And if you're in a position where you both can't grow on that you need to grow by incorporation, and you can't bring anything in, then you're just going to wither off. And we have a real problem with that. Real problem with that we can't incorporate. And there's two ways to go wrong. One is you just don't incorporate. You just bring everybody in the room, and that's not incorporation. But the other is you refuse to do the graft. As I say, it's just unclean to bring anybody in, to bring anything in. They have to adapt to us. Well, that's not how grafting people in works. I mean, they do have to adapt. That is to say, they have to grow into it. But that's not the same thing as they have to. It's the difference between they have to be made clean and they have to already be clean. If what you want is you're bringing in sinners, you're bringing in the world, and you want them always already to be clean, as if they were already baptized, that's not going to work. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about bringing in culture.
One more quick thought.
Yeah, go ahead. And we got about 30-ish minutes before I don't like to extend this too long.
Does anybody remember the recent Balenciaga controversy? Paying attention? Right, so it's kind of funny, like, there are people still worshiping that god, because part of the controversy, for anybody who doesn't know, is that they posted these ad campaigns with children in BDSM gear. And in these ad campaigns, one of the things that was so kind of noteworthy or controversial is they spelt their logo, Balenciaga, like subtly within some of these ad campaigns with the name of the god spelled Baal. And that's related, I think he was talking about that, Baal as part of, was he mentioned in that?
Yeah, he
I know
did.
he mentioned Moloch, but Baal.
That's back to the bull.
Yeah,
Bull is
back to the bull, yeah. So I think that's just really interesting that is kind of a nod to this is still kind of going on.
Yeah, the Moloch thing is still
Yeah.
with some Satan.
Also note how in each of this, he did this last week with the lion. Keep in mind that these animals are incorporated into angelic imagery, but he'll also do the satanic possibility of the image. But you have to remember. So remember, because this is again back on that question of purity and cleanliness. We have a tendency to dualize with Satan and go Satan over here, God over here. Satan's a fallen angel. Satan's an angel. That doesn't mean he's a good guy. That means that Satan is a twisted up thing that God has for divine purposes.
Is one of the things you're, just so I can comprehend what you're saying, is when, as far as purifying and this merging of cultures, like, for example, when allegories of Christ are mentioned, that there's a reference to Helios or Apollo, and then, Christ being, I guess, the purified example of, is that the purifying of these old gods?
I mean, I'll keep in mind, the Pantheon is just a pagan temple that they gave us, and then we converted.
Whenever, like, you read certain literature and you see, Christ as the Apollo or Apollo and Helios, and that he is this, is that an attempt to
in fact,
is that an attempt to purge these old gods and replace and purify with the image of Christ?
Yeah, in fact, that was just de facto. I've got all the way up until the 7th century, the reconversion of England, where the Pope's like, just go up there, take over, take over a pagan temple, just take it over, build the church there. You know how they've been, and then he'll be like, hey, you know how they've been sacrificing bulls and stuff? Well, they're not going to be doing that there anymore. But on major saints' days and feast days significant to the area, just have them come, and they can build huts outside of the church, and then they can kill their animals there, and they can sacrifice them in thanksgiving to God. Let's just say they could give them as gifts.
So that was like the process of purification.
Like people are like, oh, we took this from the pagans. No, we didn't take it from the pagans. We took we know that they'll do this with Easter and Christmas. They say, oh, we took it from no other way around. We knew that day was important. We knew we had to evangelize to people. We're not going, and there's some debate over the, but at least let's say we didn't take that date, but let's say that we know there's important things going on around that date. Okay, what are you going to do? You're going to say, hey, go fast from having anything important going on that for about 10 years, and then come back and you'll have Christmas. No, that's not how anything worked. We said, look, you got plenty of good things here and plenty of good symbolism here, but that's all going to be reordered around Christ now. And here's how.
I have a really good quote that was just shared in a group chat related to this. Pope Pius VIII, 1951. The Catholic Church has neither scorned nor rejected the pagan philosophies. Instead, after freeing them from all error and contamination, she has perfected and completing them by Christian revelation.
Hey, there's a great bit. It's lost now because it's only in scholastic Latin literature right now. But it's a dead scholarly controversy. But there was a controversy in early modernity, early Enlightenment theology about, hey, they believe it turned out to not be true. We know now, but at the time it was thought, hey, we got a whole bunch of our liturgy and stuff from Egypt. Like they thought they had demonstrated that the liturgy had descended from Egyptian ritual, and then that this is a big deal and a problem. And the Vatican scholastic thing said, no, that's fine. We just we took it and purified it, and it basically said, look, any prayer the church takes from anyone, that's ours now.
Yeah.
It was always God's, and we put it in right order, basically.
Exactly.
I like that perspective a lot.
But
Makes sense.
here, so I'm going to treat this Mystagogy primarily. I'll get to you, but we're down to 25 minutes, and I've run over. I'm going to treat this Mystagogy as primarily an elaboration of last week and a cleaning up rather than going on to prayer. But there's a reason. This is all preparatory to being able to understand. I know it's a little nebulous, but it's all preparatory to being able to understand why you do any of the things that you're doing. And look, why? I'll just go to it. The primary things we cover when I talk about prayer, I'll also talk about contemplation, but contemplation isn't totally up to you. So I can't be like, here's the steps to contemplation. I could say, look, begin to prepare yourself to receive contemplation, and then God will help you to receive it. But that's for contemplation of listening. It's ultimately the skill of contemplation is awaiting the voice of God. But the things that you can work on that can be proper works are verbal prayer and mental prayer. Okay, meditation. I'm going to try to integrate into what we're actually going to do. Why did I do all this prep? Verbal prayer. Look. Verbal prayer is first a memorization skill. You have to be able to memorize. You have to know the words. Okay, you have to be literate. You have to know the words. You have to know what they mean. You have to be able to integrate them. You have to be able to read them. You have to be able to receive them as words. You have to be able to speak them out as a whole bunch of skills. But not only that, to properly verbally pray, that is to say, to be able to go beyond just making sounds come out of your mouth, you have to be able to. The skill would be integration. You have to, or literacy, or a competence, or a imaginative extension, or intellectual ability. And how am I going to get you there? The only way I'm going to get you there is I'm going to go, look, man, the scriptures are going to require you to go through them and to pray them and to memorize them and to have them in your heart. But then what does it mean to have them in your heart? That's going to mean that you're going to extend their meaning out. You're going to be, so not only, not just a word study thing, what do these words mean connected to the other words, but what is their intellectual meaning, and how does that connect to the world? But remember, you've undergone a conversion. We don't just do, it's not an encyclopedia like, this is dirt and it's made out of carbon and silicon and stuff. It's not just extending the meaning linearly. You also have to, the whole way you are viewing the world is supposed to begin to turn around. Now, not all at once. It's not magic. It's learning. It's like let's just say, for some converts, not every convert, some people were well prepared. But some people who came into this, God gave them the direction to come into this. And it's like you applied for a job and you fibbed on your application a little bit. That is to say, look, everybody who came into this is underqualified. Except by the grace of God, you're not going to become qualified for this job. So we're going to be, God did you some mercy. He knows you're not qualified for this job. But he ignored that and did you a mercy. And he's overlooking it. And you've been put on the job. And you're going to get some on-the-job training. All right? And the only way for you to be able to ever competently get anywhere close to this job is you're going to have to start to reevaluate everything that you're doing and thinking and seeing until you begin to see stuff. And the world will have to begin to seem a product of the divine. It's just like, look, if you got hired in with underqualified as an electrician, day one, you're going to open the wall up, you're going to go, that's a bunch of spaghetti. I don't know what any of that is. Or, day one, any technical, anything with any kind of confusing. You get hired as a programmer, you don't know what you're doing. That's a bunch of numbers and brackets and squares and stuff. But they mean. But those wires mean. If you start doing on the job on construction or contracting or, of day one, that's a bunch of wood. That's a bunch of wooden nails, and I don't know. I better just tell me what to buy at Home Depot. But day two, somebody said, pick that bucket up, move it over there, put that nail in there, drill that thing. They're frustrated with you because you're an idiot. But they're the ministers of the boss. And they're going to lead you through it. Day three, you start to go, oh, that's a load-bearing beam. That truss distributes the weight. That's why it has to be like that. Oh, if I put the tiny nail in that, all the weight's going to rip that through, and your house is going to fall over. Oh, and then by day 45, you're like, oh, I kind of see how a house goes together. I kind of know what you need to not have, and get a little pretentious, and you think that you're a carpenter, and then by day 100, you're not a carpenter, and then by year 5, you are a carpenter. You understand? It's like this. We're doing vocational training in a certain way, but I have to begin. Look, why'd I give you this? Because this is so much stuff. This is so overwhelming in a certain way that the way people have connected mundane things like bulls and eagles and lions to justice and to life and to sacrifice. And you need to stand between two lions to administer justice. Why? Because somebody saw something spiritual in those animals. And ultimately through a big series of historical progressions connected to Christ and God and what's expressed in our faith. That's a big commercial office building that got built, and you don't know how that works, but it works. It does work. But that's a progress. That's what it means to begin to turn yourself around. Okay, so and that's what I mean. I'm trying to give you the steps. All right, so let me talk a little bit about verbal prayer, and I'll talk about the very basic things, and we can tie it back into what I was already talking about. So, one of the most important things about verbal prayer, and I'm not good at it very well myself, is that verbal prayer is a kind of discipline of the self. So it's not just that you say the words, it's that you know which words to say and you say them regularly, and that you make that part of how you communicate with God. So I would suggest, as preparation for a deeper discussion of verbal prayer next week, begin thinking about prayer times in the day where you can begin to engage with God. Classically, monastically, that's in the morning when you wake up, in the midday, at the end of the day. So the typical hours that anchor the day are Lauds, it's in the morning when you wake up. Vespers at the end of the working day, at the end of the cycle of the day. There's a midday refresher of some kind, or usually a set, but the idea is so you get through the midday. And then there's a close to the end, there's the close at the day before you go to sleep. And then there's, in monastic practice, of course, there's a vigil. I don't necessarily suggest that you wake up in the middle of the night, but you might consider it, at least abstractly. So, again, the whole day is to be structured around communication with God. The whole day is to be structured around God, communication with God, thought of God, speaking with God. Again, it was a question: how do I live? How do I live with God? How do I come to be God's? Well, I mean, look, you want to say I'm married, a spouse of God, or a spouse of Christ, or God's my Father. How do you be in a family with God? How do you be in a marriage with God? Well, I mean, step one to being in a marriage with somebody is talking to him at least a little bit, like every once in a while. Well, how often? In the morning, in the middle of the day, in the evening, probably before you all go to bed, and then, maybe when it strikes you at some other point in the day, we could start on that mundane level. So, and that's got to be regular. What happens if you don't talk to your spouse? The marriage goes apart. What happens if you don't talk? And I have a problem with it. I forget a little bit, so I have to keep it up as a discipline once a week at least. What happens if you don't talk to your parents? Relationship deteriorates. What happens if you don't talk to your friends? What happens if you don't talk to your family? Oh, it's gone. I mean, you're still part of the family, and a gracious family will always accept you back. But you're in the family, but you're not in the family. You're in the church, but you're not in the church. Why? You stopped praying. And what is it? You just stopped talking to God. You stopped operating with God.
Would it be irreverent to joke around with God and just talk to Jesus like
No,
that about
not at all. Not at all.
So you can create stories and tell them to Jesus in your
I mean, like, again,
because I have a lot of hilarious moments with God, and I wonder, I'm like, oh man, is this bad?
I one of the things and we talked about this very briefly, and I'll just integrate it now. We talked. I think we spoke about it in passing, and Mike spoke about it in passing before. So if you have habits like going, oh my God, or well, the profane version of that.
Yeah, not that.
But no, let me get it in. If these
silly rhymes in my head, like Mother Goose to
yeah, you could do that.
to Jesus.
But if you've had these things where, of course, you've been exclaiming things to God, actually just talk to Him. You're like,
And listen.
hey,
And listen.
yeah. And
Well, I'm kind of a weirdo, so I was just like,
no, but I mean that in a certain way, like, yeah, if you've got these little vignettes in your head, right? Yeah, talk to God about them. Nothing wrong with that. Sure, you can have texting
well, I
memes to
can figure
God.
That's not I'm praising you, my Lord. So I'm entertaining. Let me entertain you, my Lord. So
I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
perfectly okay.
I mean, David's doing that. David's sitting there and dancing. And,
Oh, I didn't even think about that. I wondered sometimes. I'm like, oh, so not sure if this is the proper.
I mean,
correspondence.
we shouldn't become over dominated by some idea of what it is we have to be at. You shouldn't read St. Francis and then be, well, I either got to be that or I'm not going to talk to God at all.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, I did this. I was in the middle of the 30-day retreat, at-home retreat for Marian Catechist stuff. I was talking to Father, and we had to do discernment on faults, and you have to pray a certain amount of time every day. It's very rigorous. And I got to the point where I discerned some things about my fault, and I got to I need to clean the house. And I'm talking to Father. I'm like, well, Aquinas prayed to see God, and he got to. and it was, and it was revelatory and life changing for him. And I got to clean my house, but it's and I already knew, and he said, yeah, but that's that. How are you going to get to that? How do you get to that? How do you get to see God face to face? You have basically a living moment of union with God, prefiguration of the beatific vision. How you begin to start at the level of this basic communication with God, where he works to purge basic things from you. I mean, the one shouldn't despise the beginning for sake of the end at all. Otherwise you just say things like, well, might as well die now. No, that's not the point. You're to run. You're given a station now on this earth by God, and this station given you by God includes the embarrassing, awkward part where you don't know what you're doing, and you have to do what you can do. That's fine. That's fine, provided that it be properly directed.
Well, if he's the king, then I'm the jester.
Yes, and that's fine.
Prayer.
That's fine. But anyway, on verbal prayer, you should spend the rest of this week figuring out how you're. Look, I've got a not a very well ordered schedule. I've got a night job. I pray that I get a lucrative day job so that I can have an ordered schedule, which is something I'm working on. But in any case, I've got a disordered schedule, so I try to have an order to the best I can. I try to have an order within the disorder. So when I did the retreat, I did my hours. They want you to do them in the morning, in the afternoon, and night, or whatever. I'm doing it at like 6 p.m., 10 p.m., and 3 in the morning. But what's important is that there's a consistent structure. Why? Because you have to build a habit. Why? Because prayer is difficult. Prayer is at least as difficult as calling your family every week. And maybe you really love talking to your family, but prayer is at least as difficult as, and I do love talking to my family, but I mean regular. You can't just do it when it strikes you. Prayer is at least as difficult as talking to your spouse even when you don't want to. Prayer is at least as difficult as keeping up things with friends, even though it might have gotten difficult, or even though you might be very busy. It's at least as difficult. It's more difficult. And it's meant to be difficult. Why? Because God wants you to achieve great holy virtue and merit in the effort. But if it wasn't any kind of difficulty, then there'd be no merit in it. So begin to think about where in your life you're going to slot this. And it's okay to fail, and you might have to go, well, I'll probably get that. But you have to start to do the discipline. And it's going to have to be at least 2-3 times a day for you to have it. And so not just according to your feeling, a discipline.
I found with the rosary that my mind would wander, and I would just be reciting with my mind going in other places. But after enough time, I'm getting better at that, to where I can just focus on my original intent and the prayer I had in mind for someone or some situation.
I found that sometimes that's not the worst thing, because I found that my mind has actually wandered to something that I should also be praying for.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's happened as well.
And we'll talk about that.
But it was hard at first because,
I just did it in the car every single day. As I got it, I put on the YouTube of it. There's every day, like, I have a video, grazie a plena donis tecum. Every single day, just do it with the tape.
Do you in Cardinal Burke? Is that who? Because that's what I do. I play him in the car.
I learned it from Taylor Marshall initially. And it was easy for me because I studied quite a lot of Latin, so it was not hard to do it. And that was just every day in the car. So, yeah.
Yes.
The car is a good time to pray. I
That
found.
definitely helps.
It is.
Yeah.
Car is very good.
I had a good friend who called it your rolling chapel.
Oh, yeah. Not only that, so one day this was actually pretty cool. I was driving, and I was reciting with her Saint Benedict, Kruk Sakara Sit Mihi Lux, that one, and I was driving and a car came right next to hitting me and it stopped dead in its tracks. I would have been dead. as I was praying. I was just like, thanks. It's like, it can actually, I believe it can protect you. Even a car is a pretty dangerous place to be, so. Personal experience, but I believe that was a little bit him, yeah.
I believe that.
Let me see what else. Oh, also, God's merciful, so habits take about 6 weeks to form. So if you think it's hard, don't worry, that's only about 6 weeks long.
It's become easier, but in the beginning, you know, I found that, you know, I needed to really concentrate more. But sometimes, like she was saying, wherever my mind would wander would be where it needed to be, you know, because I would be inspired to think about someone specifically and start praying for them.
So let me think of some other things, and I'll go by my faculty method. Also, if you're praying, I don't think anybody in here has this misunderstanding. It's very uncommon in any conservative circles I've worked in, but it still happens. If you say things like, I only pray when I don't want to pray because I don't get anything out of it, it's mistaken. That's praying for your feelings. That's wrong.
Well, see, I have
Not
a
you
problem,
personally.
the opposite of feeling unworthy to pray for myself.
Yeah.
I don't feel worthy
that way.
because if I do, then I'll say, no, not me, everyone else, you know, because there's this, so I'm like the opposite.
The cure for that is, so we're good. First, don't pray for your feelings, because that isn't how anything works. If you know, all the gifts of the Holy Spirit are in the elected will, not in the feelings. All of them. Nowhere are you promised joy. I don't know. Nowhere are you promised sensuous pleasure.
Yeah.
At all. In fact, quite the opposite.
You're promised what you need.
In fact, Christ says, take up your cross and follow me. So really, rather the opposite.
Which may be what you need.
Well,
But
it's like, you know, if I'm healthy, whenever I've had health issues, I would pray and then I would say, my situation's not that bad. Please forgive me, my Lord. And then I'll start concentrating on the horrendous things happening to everybody else I know in the world.
so there's a word for that. I don't want to say it. It's in English it's sometimes called a false humility. Not in the sense
I
of.
thought it was just some kind of mental illness that was pre-programmed.
Well, it's somewhere in between. It's somewhere in between the vice of pride and the vice of sadness. But the immediate cure is this is why part of why I teach the Psalms, because they're paradigmatic. The psalmist is to praise about himself all the time, not only, but about in fact so far as to curse his enemies, which you have to theologically integrate correctly. But this idea of only. It's also it's sort of it's activism in a little way. It's Mary and Martha's it's Marthaism in a certain way, which is not to say that Martha, which in the story of Mary and Martha, Martha is doing a meritorious act. She's ministering. It's the same word that we get. It's I don't know how to do it in English. It would be diaconating. The same thing for what the deacon is supposed to paradigmatically do is minister to people. Not that she's a deaconess or anything, but I mean in the sense that she's performing important functions in the church. Mm-hmm. But Christ says basically that's the lesser part. That is to say, there's a certain sense in which that has to fade away, and there's a certain sense where it's you and God, and
right. Well,
yeah.
and not to disclose too much personal, I think part of it is my father was physically disabled from a severe accident, and he died of alcoholism. So I had this irrational guilt that a lot of children of adult children of alcoholics and parents who are disabled or sick in any kind of way. So I think that feeds in it too. So I've always grappled with that issue. Is how do I pray for myself in times where I feel like I've got this ingrained, think about others always, because it's like this, well, it's just, and I had, previously, I was told by my Episcopal priest before I used to go to church, that guilt is the strong arm of the devil. don't, you know, try to separate yourself from that, because that's, so I don't know, my question is, you know, with that being an issue, how do you break yourself of that?
I'll eat one.
Just over time, to consider yourself in your prayers, over time? Because yes, it's an ingrained program that needs to be broken through prayer at some point, but yeah, it's just this bizarre guilt complex.
You've got a lot of things. So, I mean, first of all, you have to pray to heal the wounds. Also, on one level, you want to run. You need to run away from it in a certain way. They say you need to. If it is significantly impairing your ability to operate, you have to oppose it with the opposite action. So that might even include purposefully praying for yourself. That is to say, whatever it is that you're resisting, slot it in and do it 3-4 times a day.
I just asked you to pray for me, because that's why I chose him. And that's been a good solution so far.
If there's in therapy, you would usually break it down into pieces,
Yeah.
and then you would pick the easiest ones and do them. But you have to take the thing that you're resisting and begin to actively work against it. We're at 11:30, so. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If you got this book, as I said, each proper chapter is long enough to read during preparation before Mass. And you got 30 minutes if you're going up there right now. So, go ahead.